So I've made a couple of changes to my experimental Eurorack case here. And I thought that this would be a good opportunity to talk about why I made those changes, what the purpose of this case is, and how I see the overall design of all of the pieces working together. I call this my experimental case. With it, I'm interested in noise, sound textures, and building those things out of some of the basic principles of synthesis. I think that this case and the way that I want to approach modular synthesis generally is very inspired by what I've seen in Rob Hordike's work and his approach to synthesis. I think of his work as being very playful and generative and surprising, not in a generative composition sort of way, but in a generative sound design sort of way, where there's surprise and delight in the individual sounds that you find as much as there is in any sort of structural movement through a piece of music. I started learning about Rob Hordike's work with the Benjalin, which I have a Eurorack version of here in the case. And I think the principles of the Benjalin expand outward to everything here. It is chaotic and noisy and interesting, but it's built out of these very basic building blocks. It's two oscillators, a chaos circuit that's fairly simple once you've taken the time to read it and understand what it's doing, and then a lovely resonant filter. And with just those four building blocks and combining them in interesting ways and doing self-patching and creating feedback loops, you can create a wide variety of really interesting sounds. Connected to this approach to feedback and generativity out of small building blocks, I am really interested in the surge style of patch programmability. Modules like the Sport Modulator 2 here, I think, are invoking a surge tradition in a way that fits really nicely uh, with the Benjalin style of generativity in this case. As I see it, in both the Hordike and the Surge styles of synthesis, there's a preference for chaos over randomness. And the sounds that are produced are often engaged in a fluctuation between order and chaos, or structure and noise. And so as I figured out this case over time, I found these principles of building blocks and chaos from structure to be really useful guide points for figuring out both the contents of the case and, more importantly, the identity, the sound identity that I want to have when working with this case. In changing up this Eurorack case, there are two modules that I have taken out of it. The first is the Jolin Lab TABOR. I really enjoy this module. I love the chittery sounds, the intense rumbles, and rhythmic delight that this module can provide. But I've been finding it very incompatible with the building blocks principle that I was talking about for this case. It always ends up being this sort of block in the patch that is just the TABOR. I think in many ways that speaks to the strong identity and character of the module, and sometimes I really enjoy that. But in this context of trying to build complexity out of more simple, thinkable components, I find that character and identity to be a real double-edged sword. I'm definitely hanging on to this thing for a while, I think. One of the lovely things about modular is that it's easy to move things back and forth in a case. And I think there are times when I'm looking for a TABOR sound that I will bring the TABOR back for that thing. The other module leaving this case is the Excalibur dual filter, which is based on the Mutable Instruments Blades filter. I got this because I thought that I wanted a dual filter, and I really thought that I was going to love this thing. A certain amount of one's feelings about a filter can just really depend on the individual filter and the way that it's processing the sound. But I also think that I was expecting a little bit too much from it. I thought that the multiple resonant peaks and the wave folders that are built into the drive knobs here would really give me tools for transforming the sound in interesting dynamic ways. And I just found that I wasn't using it as intentionally as a tool as I expected myself to be using it. I found that I was missing the multi-mode outputs that a filter like Ripples or the filter on the Benjamin has. And while there are some interesting things that I can do with this dual filter, I didn't find myself using it in a more advanced way than two adjacent filters very often, or at the very least, I didn't find the sounds that I was getting out of it when I was using it in that way to be particularly compelling or easy to work with for me. I've made a lot of really interesting sounds with this filter. There's a lot of times where I've thought, wow, that's really cool. But I don't find myself using it intentionally in the way that I have other filters. And so I don't know, there's just something weird with filters. I think filters are weird. So now that I've talked a bit about what I've taken out of the case, let me focus on the new things that I've added. There are two new modules in this case, and those are the TABOR Multifilter 2 and the Schlappy Engineering Nibbler. The Nibbler is really interesting to me. It's sort of Rungler-esque in the way that it is accumulating and shifting data within a register, but it has a lot more control points to destabilize that data compared to the Rungler. It can be patched very much like a Rungler, but then it can also do a lot of other things. And with the gate outputs for the individual bits, it can produce really fun ordered sequences that you can then destabilize by sending more data to the inputs of the Nibbler to shift it around. I really love how many patch points there are on the Nibbler for this destabilizing or building structure, and I think that that makes it a very useful building block for complexity and tension between order and chaos in the case. The multifilter is a multi-mode filter with a couple of really fun features. When I took out the Excalibur, I knew that I wanted a different filter back in the case to complement the filter in the Benjamin. As I said when I was talking about the Excalibur, I really missed the multi-mode outputs. I find that I'm so often wanting to simultaneously use both a low pass and a high pass output, or to patch the band pass back into some other part of a feedback loop. The crossfader on the input, the ping input, the saturation that can come with the level control, these all give some nice little functional utilities to the filter. And then the mode input on the variable output can do some really great sounding distortion and phase modulation. I've been having such a good experience with the Sport Modulator 2 that I was really interested in bringing more TABOR modules into my system. There's just so much that I've enjoyed about the flexibility of the Sport Modulator 2. The idea of having an equally flexible filter made this really interesting to me. And finally, on the note of things that I've added to the case, there is a 6 HP blank slot here where I have an opportunity to add something else to the case, and I'm not quite sure what that is yet. I have something in mind that's currently in the mail coming this way, and I'm really excited to give that a try in the next couple of weeks. But I don't quite know what fills this space. I don't think anything needs to fill this space, but I think that there are some opportunities to add more interesting building blocks that can expand the way that I treat this as a palette for synthesis. So let me give a little tour of the case as a whole. At a high level, there are several different zones to the case and ideas that inform the arrangement of things. In the upper left corner, I have envelopes and gates for ordering things in time. Then the Benjalin is a standalone platform for synthesis that can work as a sort of foundation for a lot of the patching that I do. In the bottom corner here, the Sport Modulator 2 and the Multifilter make up a second platform for synthesis, sort of like the Benjalin, where they work great as sound sources, but also as modulators or sound processors. And and these two zones of the case are normally where sound begins. Then in the bottom center, I have my little utility box. I have a flexible logic block here with and, not, or, XOR, and a flip-flop gate built into it. I have some ways to combine control voltage or audio signals. The A times B plus C is really useful as a VCA or a ring modulator. And this utility section, in conjunction with some of the things in the 1U row, some more attenuators, VCA, a clock divider, a low pass gate. These are the glue that brings a lot of the more dynamic feedback and chaos together into a controlled, intentional set of structures. The bottom right corner here is something of a control panel. I have a 3-channel matrix mixer, which oftentimes is my end of signal path mixer, with the opportunity to feed some of those signals back into the system. And then ears, which is a contact microphone, and envelope follower and external input with a preamp. And this can either bring signals in or can work as a control point for activating things. I keep this down in the bottom right corner so that no matter how chaotic the cabling gets up here, I have this little control port that I can very easily access for adjusting levels and interacting with the system. The one effect that I have in this system is the JRU Music Machines loop. It's a 2-channel digital tape loop, and I found this thing really fun and interesting to work with, both to create loops or stacking delays, but also for the way that it distorts a sound when you're using very short delays or a low speed. It's what I often call a timbral delay effect, in the way that it can modify the sound before it goes out of the system. Breaking the case down into these sub areas helps me to conceptually organize the way that I'm approaching patching on the system. The other principle that organizes where things go is accessibility of knobs and switches. Down in the bottom corner here, I said I have this control point, but then most of the knobs that I'm wanting to turn the most for performability are along the top or around the side of the case here. The Sport Modulator rates I have easy access to along the left side, and then the switches on the Nibbler, the timing of envelopes, all of the control points on the Benjalin. This area at the top and around the side stays mostly patch cable free compared to a tangle that might develop in the middle. And so from an accessibility and sort of ergonomic standpoint, I think a lot about how I'm accessing things along the top of the case, as well as the edges here. I still have a lot to learn, I'm sure, with the new modules in the case and the way that in this new arrangement I want to make sound with this case. But I'm really excited for those sounds and for getting to learn more about it and to find the way that this can work as what I've been calling a palette for synthesis. I've included a link to the modular grid for this case layout in the description. And if you have any questions about the modules that I've chosen, the way that I've set up this case, or anything that I've talked about in this video, feel free to ask in the comments. I really enjoy engaging with any questions that people have. I played a few snippets of some patches that I've been playing around with on this case at the beginning of the video. I'm now going to transition to some longer excerpts from those patches to close out the video. Thanks for following along, and I hope you have a great day.
Wow.